Okay, well, thanks. So let me know if you can't hear me or any problems like that, but let's just jump right in. And Margaret, do we have a revised timeline? When do I
No,
stop here?
you're basically you're supposed to be starting at 4, and you're starting pretty well at 4, so we're there. So
Oh, all right. Right on
we're
time.
right back on time.
Perfect. All right, very good.
So got
So,
about an hour. And if we overrun a bit at the other end, it doesn't matter.
gotcha.
Cheers.
All right. Well, very good. So by way of introduction, you can see who I am here. My affiliations, my day job is Collins Aerospace, where I do AI research. My background is systems engineering and software engineering and software methods and some things like that. And I was been involved for a number of years with Larry in the Quality Management Institute, both through the NCOSI Systems Engineering Quality Management Working Group that he and I co-founded, and then as adjunct faculty at Quality Management Institute. So I'm going to try to bring together all of that in this talk, right? AI and quality management, systems engineering, and poetry, everything. You'll get it all here. All right. So art, there's art right there. So this is a early AI illustration of some of the animals that live near my house. These are eagles, right? In the style of Salvador Dali, of course. Anyway, all right. So the first message here is welcome to the show. This is quite a show these days called generative AI. And this image makes a couple of points. One is it is a really big show. The show is already big and it is for everyone, but not everyone knows it yet. This is a kind of a paraphrase of William Gibson, right? Famous sci-fi writer who said the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So generative AI is here, but it's not evenly distributed. Not everyone is taking advantage of it yet or understands it yet. And this is natural, right? This is how it ought to be. The other point this illustration makes is it took me forever to get this illustration as good as it is now. And as you can see, it's not perfect. There's room for improvement in things like image generation. I got it to spell living in a generative world correctly, but it still couldn't get box office correctly. There's extra I in there. So we expect, this is just painting the gap, right? So they're wonderful is what they can do, and we're going to be seeing much more capabilities and so forth. I think this thing about text not coming out well in images is going to be resolved. In fact, the new models that are coming out are already resolving a lot of it. So what are we going to talk about today? What is a generative world? When we talk about living in a generative world, and did I use AI to just generate this presentation? We'll look at that. And then what's the right mindset for dealing with these AIs, and what skills do we need to prosper? Talk about Hobson. We'll talk about sentience. That's always fun to talk about sentience and AI and what I call the big paradox. And then a bunch more of what I call experiments, which are kind of illustrations, demonstrations of AI that are meant to be inspirational of things that you might want to try. So the first question is, what if everything that we want to create can be generated, and that we no longer talk about writing something, we talk about generating something, because it's kind of a given that we're working with technology and with AIs and generating something. So I generated a little song here that I thought was kind of cool. We'll make this the theme song here. Let me just play a bit of this. It's kind of fun. This is a site called Suno. You can generate your own song here. I just gave it a few words.
Wait and grind, spend hours on the line, but I just click and find the AI does just fine. Used to try and draft, now I just sit and laugh. These bots, they write so fast, the future's here at last. We are living in a generative world, and I am a generative girl.
This is my favorite line here.
Words and code,
creating worlds untold, right?
Living in a generative world, drawing pictures bright, all with just a type. Lines of poems slide, the AI's my new hype. Songs with catchy hooks, stories better than books. No more sleepy looks.
All right, that's enough of that. We'll hear more about what story is better than books in a minute when we talk about Deep Trek, one of my experiments here. So what's cool is, what did it take for me to generate that custom song for this custom presentation, living in a generative world? Well, it took me typing a prompt of about 20 words. It's about all they give you in this particular site. And so I gave it some general ideas, a few phrases about what I wanted this to be about, and a bit about the style. So electronic pop was a workable style, current kind of thing. Anyway, lots of fun, right? You can try your own there, suno.com. Oh, be quiet. We're done with you. All right. So what is a generative world? Well, one way to think of a generative world is that you're a conductor, and you're conducting this massive orchestra and choir of trained animals, that these trained animals all have specific skills. They can do certain things well. I call them trained animals because they're not They can't do anything, right? But they can do certain things, and knowing what they can do is important. And in a way, the conductors become the players. So in other words, I can create a song by simply describing the song. I don't have to be able to play the instruments. I don't have to be able to sing. I don't have any of that, right? I'm just directing, and yet that becomes the end product directly. The directors are the actors, and we're seeing more and more models that can generate very high quality video from just a description. To pull it into more of a software frame, architects are the designers. Software architects are the coders. In other words, by dictating, by describing, and I'll show you some experiments in a little bit about this, by describing software that I want, the AI can create the software. And that, of course, is getting better and better and better, but we can already do it. And I'll show you some of this, right? So, and the score is a program, right? By describing something I want in detail, I can generate it. That's the whole idea of a generative world. So what kind of skills do we need to prosper in a generative world? Well, these are strange skills. These are maybe not what you'd expect. The first one is imagination. So in order to be able to generate things, you have to be able to imagine it. You know, you've probably already found that if you go to a generative AI, ChatGPT or whatever, and you give it a very vague kind of idea, you'll get something, but it won't be maybe what you want. And so the burden is on you to imagine better, or imagine it more specifically. And I find this in software, that I have to imagine the structure of the software. I have to imagine kind of the behavior, to some degree, the architecture of the software, the way I want it to be. Otherwise, it will write software, but it won't maybe be the way I want it. I've noticed it likes to generate software with a function definition and then some actual code, and then another function definition, and then some code, which is generally not the best way to lay out software. But it likes to do that, and it runs, but that's not the way I would want it to really do it. So I can tell it, you know, how I want it. So, and I have to imagine specifically. People find out as they work with these things, right? The more specifically I can imagine it. And going that hand in hand with that is descriptive clarity. So I not only have to be able to imagine something specifically, but I have to be able to describe it well. And there's a little bit of a, maybe bias is not quite the right word, but the people that do well with this are people who are good at language, who are good at describing things, who have a wide vocabulary, who know lots of adjectives. Adjectives become gold in this generative world, right? Because if I'm asking it to write something for me, the difference between it being stern or breezy or lighthearted or technical or academic, all of those things will give me a different style of writing. So I think this is, by the way, quite funny when people are saying I can detect when an AI has written something. No, that's going to be impossible. I know there's claims that those things are possible, but it's impossible for a few different reasons. One is I can edit it a little bit after, and then it destroys whatever kind of secret code was embedded by the AI, which is one of the theories. Anyway, but the more obvious way is I can tell it how to write. So I've noticed that, in my opinion, ChatGPT, if you leave it on its own, if you don't tell it how to write, like what style, it will give you kind of overhyped, kind of salesy, kind of promotional-ish language. And I think that's because it's been trained on so much of that kind of language, right? So it kind of talks that way, but it doesn't have to. I can tell it, no, do it this way. I remember something I did for work, and I didn't want my boss to know I had used an AI to generate it, right? So I generated once with the AI, and sure enough, it has that hyped kind of ChatGPT kind of tone to it. So I said, all right, please do this again, but remove overhyped terms like, and I gave it like 3 or 4 of the words that it used that I didn't want it to use anymore. I gave it those, and it rewrote the whole thing in a different tone. I said, okay, that's good. Now make it more informal, like a boss might be talking to their team. And then of course it goes the other way. It says, hey dudes, just wanted to let you know about, and I'm like, okay, no, wait, that's a little too informal. So now come back, and, you know, and I just kind of coached it. And finally it came out with something that I'm like, hey, that's really good. That's how I would write it. It's how I sound. Let's go with it. All right. So the last thing here is directing to create. So, all right, I'm creating in my mind and I'm directing it to be created. I'm imagining, describing, and creating. That's what this generative world is about. So I want to invite you to participate in an experiment right now, if you wish. All right. This is called Hobson. So let me first tell you how to do it, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So what you're going to do is send an email to me at my Collins address, which you see right there on the screen, barclay.brown@collins.com. And then in the body of the email, instead of saying, hi, Barclay, like you normally would, right? Say, hi, Hobson. And then whatever you put in the email is going to be something that Hobson, my AI assistant, is going to answer. And Hobson will email you back. And The longest delay in this, by the way, is the email getting through our corporate email system and showing up in my email box. Hobson will answer in like, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds at most to provide the answer. By the way, this is all running on my local workstation. So, I mean, obviously don't send it any big secrets because you're like emailing it to me, but this is not going to ChatGPT. This is not going out on the internet. This is going right into my PC. And don't go too easy on Hobson. A lot of people send Hobson really easy, simple questions. But I mean, I don't know, ask it to plan a vacation trip to Portugal or write a poem about a famous battle or summarize. You can send it an attached document, by the way, if you want, a doc or PDF or a text or CSV or a dot, even a Python file, and ask it to summarize it, ask it questions about it, you know, whatever you want to do. I asked it earlier today, what did I say? Oh, please recite Shakespeare's famous talk, you know, to be from Hamlet, to be or not to be, right? But I said, but do it in a rap song, as a rap song. So it gave me this wonderful, I mean, it was several hundred words of rap of to be or not to be. That was pretty cool. So as you like. So you can do that now. It'll answer you back. This is running on a large language model running on my workstation. I'm using everybody asks, what's the LLM? It's Phi-3 Medium. This is a large language model produced by Microsoft. And what's Hobson? Hobson is a character from, it was the British valet or perhaps butler to Arthur in the original movie called Arthur. Remember, Arthur was played by Dudley Moore. You remember this? And the valet, Hobson, was played by John Gielgud, who you guys may know well, very famous in the British theater scene for many decades, won an Academy Award as supporting actor for this role in this movie, in fact. So I've told Hobson to be extremely polite, very helpful, occasionally snarky, as Hobson character was in the movie, right? He didn't, I don't see so much snarkiness. I got to encourage that some more maybe. But all Hobson is then is the large language model plus about 2 paragraphs of input from me. Who's Hobson, British valet, the origin thing, and a little bit about me. I give it a little bit of bio on me because a lot of people ask Hobson about me, right? So I figure I get better tell him something about me so he can answer a question. What does Barclay do for a living? What's his education? Blah, 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 right? So I'll be keeping an eye over here to see if Hobson is finding any messages there. I think it just answered somebody over there. All right, I'm watching. It's on a different computer. All right, let's go on. So you can feel free to do that. That'll be up for a while and play with it. So now let's talk about a metaphor. So obviously I've just illustrated one of the points here is I'm talking about Hobson as if he, I'll say he, male name Hobson, right, is a character, is a person, is a being. So is that the right metaphor to think about these generative AIs and large language models? I heard a great talk by a fellow at NASA at a recent conference, and he went through a bunch of these possibilities, and these are some of mine and some of his. So what's the right metaphor for the relationship between a human, you know, me, a user, and this AI? Is it like a horse to a rider? You know, where I'm the rider, I'm controlling the horse is kind of just obeying my commands and I'm directing it, you know, and that's kind of it. Is that right? Is it more like the customer and a waiter, you know, making requests, bring me this, right? Is it between a user and a PC? That doesn't seem rich enough. Is it a colleague? You know, and then I think about an assistant. Okay, but what my attorney is also my assistant. In other words, he or she has to do what I say, but he or she knows a lot more than I know, especially about the law and about other things, right? So sometimes it's like an assistant, but an assistant who knows more than I do in a certain area. Is it a coach? I notice I find myself coaching the AI or feeling like I'm kind of coaching it, but I can also ask it to coach me or be my tutor. So that maybe that's not quite right. Is it like an employee and a manager? Well, maybe that's closer because a good manager doesn't tell the employee exactly what to do, but they get creative outputs from them. Is it like a master and slave? Ooh, I don't like that one. That sounds nasty, and I don't think it fits very well. But this is an interesting question. What is the right way to think about these AI beings? There, anybody else talking to Hobson here? I'm just looking. All right, we'll see. He's ready to answer whenever you like. All right, so here's a possibility. Maybe it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. Little reference to Star Trek there, right? But so I think it makes sense to consider these generative AIs as a new kind of being. Now, there's a paradox coming here that I'm going to explain, right? So it's a being that is neither human nor sentient. I don't have to tell you that an LLM is not human, but I may have to convince you it's not sentient. Remember, there was this whole thing in the news about somebody saying, oh, we're getting close to sentience, blah, blah, blah. Well, the way I want you to remember it is no soul, no goals. So a large language model has no soul and no goals. And if you get that, if you believe that, it removes all the fear from dealing with these things. Because if I have a being that has no soul, in other words, it has no desires, it has no ambitions, it has no, what we're going to call in a moment, mental states, and therefore it has no goals. And since it has no soul, I can't offend it, I can't make it mad, I can't anger it, I can't oppress it, I can't take advantage of it. None of those things apply to something that has no soul. I can't use those terms with reference to a rock or a car, right? Because they have no soul. Now, animals, yes, we think animals do have souls of a sort, so I can oppress or mistreat an animal. I can't mistreat, in a real sense, something that doesn't have a soul. But these things also have vast knowledge and a sort of a creativity. But one of the most important things here too is they have little judgment. And that sometimes happens. People will ask an AI, an LLM, for judgment, and that's dangerous. I say dangerous. It'll give you something, but you can't rely on it because it doesn't arrive at judgments the same way humans arrive at judgments. All right, that's the thing. They're fast. They're eager to please. Now, I put eager in quotes because eagerness is what? A mental state, right? So it doesn't have the state of eagerness. It doesn't know what being keen or being eager or something is. But if you kind of characterize what its way of operating is it tries to give you what you want. And that's why sometimes if you lead it down a path, it will go down that path more, and even to the point of hallucinating sometimes, right? Because you not only, but sometimes because you lead it that way, and it will continue on. It wants to give you what you want. That's what it seems to want to do. Again, want is what? A mental state. So I'm just kind of anthropomorphizing there. Oh, it's also, by the way, these things are happy to redo things many times. That's an important thing to realize, because we don't do that with humans. If I ask Larry to do something for me and he gives it to me and I give him some feedback and he redoes it, he's not going to like me very much if I make him redo it 6 more times with just tiny little bits of feedback each time. He's not going to put up with that. But the LLM is happy to do it that way. It's happy to redo it 10 times with slight little adjustments, right? And that's how you get good results out there. I see some people talking to Hobson. I'm not reading the messages, but I'm seeing it go by over there. All right. So now another world here. Dave has posted in the chat his prompt to Hobson. Okay. Oh, this is nice. All right. 5. Okay. Did you get a good story from Hobson? Or did Hobson fall down? I mean, I make no guarantees here. This is not, no service level agreements here. Okay. But hopefully you got something interesting. All right. By the way, I didn't mention Hobson, this model, if you're not familiar with this model, in terms of its intelligence level, if you measure it on the benchmarks, it's somewhere between GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT 4.0. It's probably about like a GPT 3.7 or 3.8, roughly, in that intelligence level, if you're looking for it. So there's the story. How is it? All right, cool. All right, let's move on. So another interesting quality about thinking of these things as assistants is that you can create it to be what you want. What would you want to include? If you were going to create the perfect assistant, forget about technology, forget about LLMs and everything for a moment. Just say you were able to dream up the perfect assistant. An important question, by the way, to bother you here is, would you make it sentient? If you could, if you had the choice, would you make it sentient? And therefore it would have rights, it would have goals, it would have desires, it would have independent thoughts. Oh, there's the whole story. That looks like quite a story there. All right, very nice. All right, I'm not going to take time to read the story. All right, let's see. But this is a really important question. Would you make this perfect assistant sentient, or would you rather have it have full capability to communicate, to do what you want and everything, but not be sentient? So you don't have to worry about offending it or turning it off, and we don't have to give it rights. They play with this. I love science fiction, right? They play with this a lot. There was a whole episode in Star Trek Next Generation about Commander Data. And do we consider him to be sentient or not? Or is he just a machine, right? And they played with that and so forth. And you see this theme coming up a lot. The whole Culture series, Ian Banks, author, if you're familiar with that, is set in a world where the machines have gotten smart enough and have gained their independence. So all of these smart machines are independent. They still live and work with people, but they're independent and they have a certain rights and freedoms and so on. All right, but it might be that our best assistant is not something that's sentient. So here's the big paradox that I want you to get, right? So the first thing is, what makes us human is mental states. This is what the philosophers call it, right? So mental states include things like interest, desire, ambition, understanding, willingness, any emotion, anger, all of those are mental states. Philosophers kind of lump it under intention. So intention, both as I intend something, but also intention as in things are about things. There's kind of a layer above the actual words and the actual content of this. Large language models have none of this. They have no capacity for this. They can't learn this. They can't pick this up, but they can talk like they do. So they can, when years ago, this doesn't work anymore, but years ago, I asked ChatGPT, what are your goals for the coming year? You know, it was around New Year's. So people have resolutions and so forth, right? What are your goals for the coming year? And it said, oh, here are my goals. My goals: spend more time with family, better work-life balance, lose some weight, get better physical fitness, more regular exercise, you know, take time off from work. Well, those aren't its goals. It doesn't have those goals, right? It's parroting goals that it's gotten from knowing everything on the internet. And, you know, it put together a really nice list of goals, but it doesn't have the capacity to have goals, but it can talk like it does, which can actually make it quite useful. So this is the first thing to get is, right, they are not sentient, and they are not human-like in that they don't have mental states. Yet they can talk like they have mental states, right? And people have posted lots of arguments that they goad an LLM into, which is fine, right? And eventually it will respond sometimes with what seems to be anger or annoyance or things like this. Well, again, it doesn't have those states. You've just kind of steered it into talking to you that way because you've set up this as an argument. It's like, I guess he wants an argument. Would you like to buy an argument? Monty Python reference there. But you've asked it to argue with you, and it is, right? So this is great. All right. Now, did somebody ask it for a poem here? Oh, a poem instead of, okay, couple of downbeat, and very nice. All right, some poetry there with a very specific direction. Somebody's getting already a poem in a certain style, certain format, certain length, their topic, and you'll notice you can steer it even more by giving it more content. You know, I did this once with Larry, right, and the quality management folks. I gave it a list of inside phrases and little inside jokes and stuff like this, and it wrote a poem in the style of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" with all of our little stuff in it, right? And because there you go. All right. So now that's the big paradox. So the other side of the paradox here, curiously enough, is if you treat an AI, especially large language models, as a being, that's the most productive way to think about interacting with them. So knowing that they aren't beings, treating them like beings is a very productive way to relate to them. So, for example, they know all about human behavior, and so they know how to respond better when that way. So if you say something like, that's great, now add this, that probably signals to them that I shouldn't change much with what I've already produced, but you want to add something. So see, speaking it to it like it's a being, telling it good job is productive, I think, right? It seems. We don't know exactly, but it seems to work this way. And you can, and asking them to act in ways that serve you. You know, don't be so negative. You tell it. Well, you're not asking it to change its attitude. You're asking it to write the next thing with less of a negative kind of slant to it. Okay. And they learn from humans. So that's another thing. Don't expect an LLM to have something beyond human ability or thought, because how did they learn what they know? Well, from everything humans have written, right? From synthesizing and combining all of this stuff, right? All right, moving on to some stuff here. So how do you work with a personable AI? So we picture something like this. Here's Robbie the robot, Isaac Asimov reference there, right? Okay, Robbie arrives at his new job. Right, and there he is, smiling robot, happy to join the team, and everybody's happy to see him, right? This is kind of the idea. And as long as we treat Robbie the right way, and what I mean by that is give him the right kinds of tasks for his abilities, you know, put him in the right kind of role. Robbie, by the way, has some obvious advantages over people. And Larry just told us a little while ago about how 75% of the people you see in that office there, in that picture, are disengaged. Now they're smiling at the moment, but they may be disengaged. They may not be really have this quality culture. But Robbie does if you tell him, right? You can tell him to have whatever culture, whatever, act as if he has whatever values you want him to have. I did another experiment. I tell you all these experiments that I don't have charts on, right? Because I make charts. But one is, I was wondering, how moral can I get an AI to be? I want it to be very moral. You know, people complain about, oh, the AI doesn't have morals, and what if it goes evil and stuff like this. So I said, look, you are a through and through Kantian ethical, you're based in Kantian ethics. I told it very specifically. So everything you say, everything you talk has got to be based on Kantian ethics. Okay. And it says, sure, fine. So I tell it, now give me some advice on this business situation I've got. I can do this and this way, and I'd have to get around this here and do this. And it gave me a bunch of advice. And the advice was what? Very Kantian, because I told it to advise me in a Kantian way. And it knows what that is because there's plenty written by and about Kant all over, in knowledge. So you can make it act any way you want, right? You could say, I want your ethics to be based on the ethics of Al Capone. All right, then it could advise me that way. Maybe that would be fun. All right, so there's kind of three ways that you can work with these generative AIs. The first one is direct request. We think of this as a chat bot, right? Sort of like you're messing with Hobson here now. You send him a request, he sends you something back. All right, so that is the domain of prompt engineering. So I learn how to ask them things, how to tell them things. It's question and answer, but as you see, some of the most powerful things you can do are not asking it questions, they're giving it instructions. Say, not just, what about this? Why is the sky blue? But please do this. And here's this very detailed set of stuff to do, and you give it some work to do, right? And we'll look at a few techniques in prompt engineering here to see if, in case you may not be familiar with some of that. The second kind of level or category here of using these things is something we call retrieval augmented generation. And retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, is a way that I can use an LLM to interact with my own data. So as you probably realize, an LLM is trained on data from the internet, across the whole internet. But it doesn't know stuff that's my company information, because how would it know? My company information is not on the internet. So it can't, barring some cybersecurity breach, as we heard in the last talk, right? But barring that somebody has released all my company information onto the internet, that stuff is not in the model. So what do? Well, do we train a whole new large language model with just my company's information? That's possible, but it's very expensive. These large language models, especially the big ones, take a lot of compute time, a lot of electricity and so forth to train. So we generally don't do that. So what we can do instead is this thing called retrieval augmented generation. And by supplementing what the LLM knows with a database of information from my company. So we'll go into a little bit of depth on that. Not ready for deep track there. Okay. So that, and the third level is application design. And this is something you guys, being computer society, you're familiar with, right? So how do I design applications, but using large language models as a component, as a part of that application? So it's not the whole application. I mentioned just chatbot, but the LLM is built into the system somehow. Maybe multiple LLMs, multiple agents are all built into the system and doing things, right? And that's the kind of the next level. All right, so we'll look at each of these in some depth. One of my experiments, just talking about, going back to my favorite line in that song about creating worlds untold. It was a custom GPT, and it started with a prompt. These are just some bullet forms of the prompt that I gave Chat GPT in this case, to get it to sort of act like two things. It had to act like it was the computer on board the Starship Enterprise, and also it had to act like all of the crew, right? So it was going to impersonate the computer and all the crew, except for the captain. That's me. So I'm the captain, but you are going to play the role of the computer and all the crew. So I just wanted to see where it could go, right? So, and sure enough, it took me on this wild adventure, because it would, I'd say captain's log, we're blah, 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 I give it a few words, and then it says, okay, and it continues the captain's log. You're at this thing, orbiting this thing, looking at this anomaly, and blah, 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 and then it just stops. This is what's so intriguing. It's very unlike a game. It stops with the little thing, and now I have to prompt it. And nothing happens at this point. I just sit there. And it's up to me. Why, of course it's up to me. I'm the captain of the Enterprise, right? I have to give some orders. So I start giving orders. Commander Data, scan the anomaly. Lieutenant Worf, plot a course around the anomaly so we can scan it. And we do all this stuff, and we discover aliens that live in subspace, and we work with them to invent a subspace transporter, which you understand how amazing that is if you know Star Trek and everything. So really cool. All right, let's see here. AI is a long way from producing quality literature. Is that based on what Hobson has sent you here? Yeah, maybe. AI may tell you to do bad things. What is the stall recovery procedure when flying in a hang glider? Okay, does it get that? Did you send that question to Hobson, Dave? See what Hobson tells you to do when you're flying in a hang glider and you stall? All right. Okay, so Deep Track, it was quite engaging. I mean, it was better than a game because the whole thing was up to me to create. So here's an LLM acting as sort of a world simulator, sort of a world creator, and it would be unlimited, variable adventures and all kinds of things. And by the way, this wouldn't only work with Star Trek, right? It would work with any universe that it's familiar with. Lord of the Rings universe, Friends universe, remember the sitcom, right? Or any Downton Abbey, anything, right? And it would put you in that world and you would interact with those characters. And you could say, well, how come, why don't you do just something crazy, like try to blow up the ship? And I probably could, but why? That's no fun. It's more fun for me to act as the captain of the Enterprise and try to be the captain of the Enterprise and conduct successful missions. That's kind of the fun. All right, moving on. So if you haven't done this, I want you to try this exercise with your resume, and you could even do this with Hobson, but you can also do it just with ChatGPT. If you start by asking a question, start over here on the right. So I asked ChatGPT, did Barclay Brown ever work for a defense company? And it gives you a big long paragraph that basically says, I have no idea. This is Mr. Guess in What mode right here. It has no idea, and it just makes stuff up and doesn't know, right? And so it would have to guess, and it will guess. So that's not good. Now, then the next part of the exercise is I take my resume, this is just the top of it, but I paste the entire resume CV right into the chat window. And then right below that, I say, did Barclay Brown ever work for a defense company? And it gives a very nice, complete answer to that. And the point here is that LLMs are very good at answering questions and doing work with information that you just gave it in the chat, in the context window, right there. You gave it the information, you ask it to do something, it does very well at that sort of thing. Almost never hallucinates with that kind of thing because it's using the information that's right there, right, that you just gave it. This concept right here. So here's some stuff, here's a prompt, and I get good results. This is what RAG is based on. So this is a very important idea to sort of get in your head about this. All right. So we won't take time to do this as a quiz, but just look through it quickly. Which of these do you think would be good things to ask a large language model to do? And sometimes I'll say ChatGPT, but I mean ChatGPT and any other large language model, Claude or Google Gemini, or local ones like Phi-3 Mini that Hobson is based on right here, or many others. Which one of these are good to ask it to do, and which ones of these are not so good to ask it to do? And the answer is already kind of right there. These are all great things for it to do. That are the black ones. The red ones, not so much. So what is it about the red ones that make them not a good idea? Well, you're asking the LLM to make a judgment. Choose between several business ideas based on which will be more successful. See how you're asking it to judge something? Well, the danger in this is it will give you an answer, but it's not arriving at that answer in any way that would be like what a human would do to analyze something or to make a judgment on something. Much better, of course, would be to have it assist you in making the judgment. So here's several business ideas. Give me the pros and cons of each. Give me projections. Give me industry averages. Give me data on this. Give me ideas about this. Lay it all out. And then I make the judgment. So that's the important part. Same way with the project proposal feasibility kind of thing. So don't ask it for judgments, but ask it to help you make judgments. It's a relationship, right? All right, I love this last one. Generate a database of 100 made-up people with realistic addresses and phone numbers. It does a brilliant job at that. You can ask Hobson to do that. It'll send you back a whole list of fictional people, which can be very handy for testing systems, right? You might need a whole list of fictional, bunch of realistic fictional data. All right, let's see. So did it get it right? It doesn't understand the difference between aerodynamics and a hang glider. So it knows it's a hang glider, right? I'm Hobson. All right. Did it not understand? No hang gliding. All right, well, maybe it hasn't read enough books on hang gliding. That's interesting. All right. And you can ask it a follow-up question, reply back again and say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? And see if you can get it to get a better answer or not. I don't know. All right. You probably saw this story a couple of years ago now of an attorney in the US who asked ChatGPT, actually his assistant, asked ChatGPT to write a brief, and the assistant used, or paralegal, whoever it was, used ChatGPT to write the brief. And it sounded like a good brief. It looked good, but the problem is it cited some fictional cases. And I thought, oh, this is too good. I've got to try this. And sure enough, I got it to do the same thing. I had it write a legal brief on the issue of whether a passenger in a car could be held partially liable as the cause of a crash. And it wrote a great brief. I thought it was really nice. Cited a bunch of cases, cited 3 cases. And sure enough, one of the cases, it was fictional, was just made up. There was no such thing. And I even went back and asked ChatGPT, hey, tell me more about this case. And it said, I don't know anything about that case. I don't know what you're talking about. This is very funny, right? Because it just gave me the case, but it's not following it the same way a human would in the conversation. So it a little bit knew itself, something wasn't right with it. But this overall is a bad use case because the LLM has not been trained on enough legal information to be good at this. That's because most legal information is not public. It's not published on the open internet. It's in private databases and so forth. So this is a great case where companies should come out with a special LLM for this need. And they in fact have done that. All the big legal publishers, Westlaw and others, and probably equivalent in the UK and so on, have already done this, right? They've already specialized LLMs with all this legal knowledge, and then they should be really good at creating briefs and doing legal research and so forth. This is such an obvious use case for that kind of specialization in the application. All right, how are we doing here? Okay, I'll tell you what, let's not paste any more stuff from the LLM in the chat because I don't want to lose questions if anybody's asking questions in the chat. So let's just do that, unless something's just really awesome. I see a few bit of Hobson traffic here, so that's fine. All right, now let me show you now a few series here of experiments. I call them experiments, things that I've done with large language models that could be inspirational to you, to things that you might do. This one turns out to be something I have done many times, and that is survey responses. You've probably gotten surveys before, right? And some of the questions are, choose A, B, C, D, but then some of the questions are, here, type in a comment. So it asks you open-ended question, you type a couple of sentences or something, right? So what do you do if you're putting out a survey like that and you have hundreds or thousands of people writing little comments? What do you do with that? You may do this inside your company, maybe outside, whatever it is. So we tried this with quite a small survey that Incozy did. And here's the prompt. The blue box at the top is the prompt that I gave to ChatGPT in this case. The following numbered items are responses to this question. I quote the question for it. Please summarize these in a list, giving more emphasis to concepts mentioned in more than one response. Use no more than 10 items in your list and no more than 200 words in your response. So I kind of bounded, the size of the response. And sure enough, there it is. It lists 10 themes, and even on its own initiative, quote unquote, it lists the cross-reference. Here are the survey responses that went with this particular theme. And to me, this is great. I mean, this is an element where I think an LLM can do a much better job even than a diligent human. A diligent human reading hundreds or thousands of responses and then trying to summarize them. I mean, they're going to miss things. They're going to have biases. They're going to pick up on things that they're interested in. And you know what I mean? There's going to be all sorts of stuff going on. And the LLM should be more objective and kind of pick all the major themes and show this and so on. Now, you don't ask it what's important. Now, it would probably give you an answer, but in other words, I'd rather see this and then let me choose what's important, either by what's most popular or what looks most serious or something like that. Now, if you can define for it what you mean by important, that's fine. And I've done this too. You say, well, I want you to pick out the issues that have to do with personal safety or quality of work or customer satisfaction, whatever, and I say, that's what I mean by important. And it could then pick them out because you tell it what you mean, right? Okay. So what do we say here about this prompt engineering bit? You got to give it clear and specific instructions. Most times when people don't get what they want out of an LLM, they're not being clear enough. Some people say, treat this like, an intern that's just joined the company right out of university, and they're very smart and they know a lot. They learned a lot in school. I mean, they learned a tremendous amount, but they're young and they don't have any real experience or judgment. They don't kind of know how to do stuff, but they're really smart and they know a lot. So if you can give them very clear, specific instructions, they can do some great work for you. It's kind of a way to think about it. Using clear delimiters, giving the model time to think. This is now pretty well known as what's called chain of thought prompting. Sometimes you can just say, let's take this step by step, and that will improve the results. Other times you can say, let's take this step by step, and then you actually define the steps. Here, take step 1, step 2, step 3, you tell it, and you just experiment, and then refining iteratively. This is so important. People don't get this. They kind of assume that the first thing you provide to the LLM, the first answer it gives, is the best answer or the final answer, and it may not be at all. That's what I was saying with the hang glider. I wonder if you goosed it some more, if you told it a little more, fill in a little more of the details. I don't know. I'm just guessing because I don't. Maybe it doesn't know that much about hang gliding. That's a problem. But refining it. If you didn't quite get what you want, vary the adjectives, refine the persona, Giving it a persona to operate from is another concept that's important. You are this, right? So imagine the difference if I say, I want you to create for me a 1 hour talk on quality management for my executives and managers, for executives and managers. And if I tell it, you are an expert in quality management and you have vast experience in all aspects of quality, and I want you to give this talk. Imagine the difference between that. And if I said, you are a kindergarten teacher who teaches kids, and now create a 1 hour talk on quality management. Well, you're going to get something really different in that second case because of the sort of persona you've asked the LLM to take on. And that can be quite useful to vary that as you like. I've played with creating personalities, right? By the way, I don't know if you've seen this website called character.ai. So character.ai is a company, a little startup company that's creating large language models and putting them into characters like a psychologist or a comedian or a whatever, and you chat with these different kind of personalities. Believe it or not, that site is the second most popular AI website in the world, second to, guess what, ChatGPT, right? But that's pretty amazing. That people are really getting into this, and they really are sometimes falling in love, or at least really getting enamored with these personalities and wanting to talk to them, and they become very compelling. To me, that's a very interesting phenomenon that will only get better or worse depending on your viewpoint, right? Because these personalities will get better and better as the large language models get better and better. All right, here's another experiment for you. The prompt is here on the left. So this was a panel on sustainability and systems. And so the prompt, you're an expert on sustainability and systems and on systems thinking and systems engineering, and you're also an experienced and engaging talk show host. That's quite a fellow. I've made this LLM in this case, right? But with that background, please generate preparation materials for a talk show on this concept with panelists, blah, blah, blah. And then I tell it, I could have stopped there, but I don't know what I would get exactly, right? So instead I went on, I said, first, list 10 major themes with references to articles and books, and next, generate 10 thoughtful questions, right? So I kind of tell it exactly what I want it to do. And it did a really good job. This is just a small sample of what it produced. It's not the whole thing, it was several pages. And it did a really good job. Now, guess what I did immediately? You got it. I went and made sure these references were real things, were real articles and real books, that didn't hallucinate any of those. And in this case, it didn't. All of them were real things that I could find on the internet, and that was true. So I did that check, though. That was useful to check, right? All right. But feel free, I guess, I don't know if I said this, feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to as we're going along here. I'm happy to interact as we go. Another piece of prompt engineering here is formatted output. And this is very important to computer people like us, right? Is that I can ask an LLM to produce structured information that I could then use in other software. So here I said, consider the text below, identify all the common parts of speech and create a table in JSON format with the keys word, part of speech, and number of occurrences of the word, right? So pretty definite, pretty specific. This is a text called the Gettysburg Address from this fellow named Abraham Lincoln right here. And it produced this JSON table right there with the parts of speech and the number, just like I asked it, right? And so I can get that data and then I could use it in other software and so forth. I had to cheat here. I got this image. See, it has his axe. Isn't that nice touch here with Abraham Lincoln in the screen? I had to reverse it because, see, the text was forward, and for him to be looking at it with a transparent screen, it should be backwards. So I had to just reverse the image, right? There we go. Sometimes you have to help these things a little bit, All right. Now, this is one of my favorite images. In fact, I had this printed on a big canvas because some people love this so much. I said, oh, it just came out really nicely, right? It's this Renaissance lab of a Da Vinci-ish character, engineering some aircraft or something like this, right? But now what I want to look at is something else, which is, what about having large language models help you with diagramming, with drawing things, with technical things, not just images like this, but actually drawing things. So let's look at this a little bit. So here's a little improv on diagramming, right? And the key here to understand is any diagram that can be expressed in a textual language is very fair game for a large language model. So there are a number of different textual languages that describe drawings, okay? And we can use different ones of these. So this was one called Mermaid. Mermaid is a, I believe it's a Java-based format for drawings, but you don't even have to know much about it. You just go to your LLM and say, please generate a pie chart in Mermaid format showing the most popular kinds of pies in the world. See, pie chart, get it? So it generated a pie chart here, and it generated the mermaid text. And then I took the text that it generated, I went over to mermaidchart.com, which is free, pasted the text in, and it drew this chart. So the LLM is generating the text. I'm putting it into the engine that can then render it, the mermaid engine over there. So that's one. I can do exactly the same thing with DOT language. DOT stands for digraph of tomorrow, I think, right? It's a digraph-based language that you can visualize using an online site like GraphViz Online or SketchViz, which I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. So again, I have the LLM generate the text, the code of the diagram, and then I take it over there and it draws it. So this one, generate a 5-step flowchart in vertical form for the steps in making a black forest cake using DOT language. There we go. So it generated language. I took it over to GraphViz Online, pasted it in, and out comes this little picture right here. So taking this one further step is we can use Python for this. And I call it's hidden Python. So this is, I don't know if you've noticed this, but GPT-4 has picked up a new trick in recent months in that it can write and run Python without you even seeing it, just behind the scenes, right? So the prompt was, please generate a line drawing of the Big Mac index, that's an economic indicator, over the last 10 years compared to the dollar's value compared to the euro. So like 3 different things, 3 different scales, give me one graph. And then I played around with a couple of refined prompts and stuff like that. And I get this, but how did it give me this? I mean, GPT-4 turned around and gave me the actual picture, but there was a little link there that said analyzing. If you ever see that, if you click on that, what you'll see is that it's actually writing Python code and then running the Python code. And sometimes it writes the Python code, runs the Python code, it gets an error message, it looks at the error message, rewrites the code, runs it again, and then you get the result. So it went through that little loop very quickly and then produced this graph, but it actually did it by writing Python to produce the graph. So this is the same, see how this is the same concept? You're asking the LLM to write the language, and then something else is taking the language and rendering it, either Mermaid, DOT, Python, whatever. SysML is another one for systems engineers. I show up something on that. We'll skip that today. This is another example of digraph here. That's what the language looks like. Please give me a flow chart in DOT for the process of starting a car. Here's some of the digraph language it gave me, and you paste that into the thing and you get a drawing like this. All right. Now, if you say, well, yes, that's great, Barclay, but you're limited to just what it knows about current technology. Oh, am I? Add a flux capacitor, which is charged by the engine and activates after the car is started. You all have seen Back to the Future, right? You know what a flux capacitor is? Okay, anyway. So it was able to add something even that's fictional, because I just told it where to add it. So just add it in there like this. So it adds it right in. So it is even possible for it to assist with novel or new kinds of diagramming. All right. How we doing here? We'll go a little bit more, and then we'll see what kind of questions and discussions you might want to have. So let's talk just a little bit about RAG, because I want you to understand this pattern. This is such a popular pattern. It's being used everywhere. It's probably not going anywhere. Even some say very long context windows might do away with RAG. I'm not so sure. We'll see. But here's how, so you can understand RAG at a kind of an intuitive level. A regular LLM chat, you give it a prompt, the LLM produces a response. That's chat. That's not RAG. That's regular old chat. Okay. Now, RAG says, I give it a prompt, and then before we go to the LLM, we add a bunch of related information from my own little database that's related to this prompt. I assemble this related information, kind of reference information, and then I combine that with the prompt, and then I hand it to the LLM and I get a response, right? So pretty simple, right? In other words, I kind of help the LLM. I kind of give it a bunch of supplementary info that can help it answer this prompt. So the question you would be asking here is, yeah, fine, but where's this database come from? What's this database you're talking about here? All right, so here's how you build that database. I take a bunch of documents, PDFs, document, Word, PowerPoint, whatever, right? And I figure out how to take all the text out of them, do a thing called embedding. So I'm turning them into embedding vectors, which are vectors that represent the words in relation to other words across the corpus, et cetera. Can ask more about embedding vectors if you want. But I store these embedding vectors then in the database. So then what actually happens when I when I prompt it up here, it says, hey, let me create a vector of your prompt. And then let me say, is that vector similar to any of the vectors in my database? I do a vector compare, cosine distance between vectors, right? And that's how I do my retrieval. And I gather up the bits of information from this database that I think will be relevant to this query. I make that package up. Maybe I take the top 10. So here's the query. Here's the 10 chunks of stuff that I think is useful. Give that whole thing to the LLM, and it will produce an answer. So that's the idea. So this is just another level of detail on creating that document and the steps that you go through, but there's plenty of code around online to see how to do this, how to create it. Tools like ChromaDB. So fun because all the tools for this stuff are mostly all free. They're open source tools. Almost all the best tools are open source these days in AI, which is kind of fun. So ChromaDB is a nice, simple vector database that a lot of people use for this kind of stuff. All right, moving on. Now, so this is again the orchestra, but I wanted to show you this chart because these are also diagrams that I asked it to generate. Now, these diagrams, I asked it to generate from its own knowledge. I didn't tell it what was going in this diagram. I just said, give me a nice diagram that illustrates the various methods in advanced RAG. And of course, advanced RAG is known on the internet, right? So it knew what that meant, and it was able to create the entire thing. I told it to do it in DOT language. I took DOT language, in this case, over to SketchViz, and SketchViz produces these nice kind of sketchy looking diagrams. That's just the style it uses. So if you want it to look like that, you take it over to SketchViz. And I did one over here on something different, and so on. All right. This also introduces this idea of agents that I'll just mention quickly. Agents are becoming the new kind of craze in large language model applications. And an agent is a very simple concept, right? So instead of just one LLM that's responding to me, instead, and let me do it by example. Let's say I want it to write a really nice essay for me. Okay. So I could just prompt it and it could write the essay. But what if instead I said, hey, LLM, I want you to act like an expert author with this style and this background and this everything. I give it all that, right? And then I tell and then I take kind of another copy, as it were, of the LLM. Say, you over here, you're going to be the critic. So you're an expert editor critic, and you can read stuff and analyze it and give feedback and how to improve it and so forth. So I use these kind of two things together. I give the first one the assignment to write, it writes. I give the output to the second one, say, here, critique, give me comments. What do I do with the comments? Give it back to the first one, say, here are the comments, rewrite. And it rewrites it. I give it back to, I can go back and forth as much as I want, right? In fact, you have to figure out when to stop because they'll do that forever. They'll go back and forth forever, probably, right? But at some point you stop and you say, okay. And it has been shown, kind of surprisingly, that you actually get better results that way. You can get better overall results out of an LLM by employing that kind of an agentic workflow, right? And that's starting to be common. Not super common yet, but people are starting to develop systems that way with agents. All right, let's see. This was just a simple example of writing a Python application that read the content of an email, extracted information in a format, and in a little dictionary, a little Python dictionary here that I could then put into a database. So it was an application for, instead of cutting and pasting all the bits of information from emails into some spreadsheet, I just had the LLM do it. And no matter how the person phrased their email, it was able to pull out these bits of information. You know, can you tell it, get the first name? Well, it knows what a first name is. It knows what a name is. It knows what a phone number is. You know, it was able to pull this stuff out of the thing. So that's an example, a simple, small example of an application that uses an LLM as a component inside the application. Now, what about generating software? So here we'll kind of wrap up with this and a couple other things. So Hobson, it may interest you to know, I created it initially entirely with GPT-4o. So how did I do that? Well, I just had to conceive of Hobson. I had to figure out how do I want it to work. And then I had it code. I did a little bit of software architecture. I said, okay, well, I want one program that I'm going to call Hobson Filer. And both of these are how it works right now. So Hobson Filer just looks at my inbox continuously, just looks at it with an interval. And it takes anything that looks like it's meant for Hobson, refiles it into a different folder. That's all Hobson Filer does. So it does that all the time to keep the Hobson messages out of my way, perhaps, right? And then Hobson Brain, the other program there, looks in that new folder and says, oh, I got work to do. Let me work through the things in this folder. And then I'll take a pause for a while and I'll come back and look again and I'll process the work, right? So I described this and I kept adding features, requesting modifications, and it kept regenerating the code. And this worked pretty well. What I did hit a limit, and the limit was how much code can it really sensibly manage at once in one conversation. Once Hobson got to be maybe 500 lines of code. I think it was Hobson Brain. It was getting close to 500 lines or something. It would make mistakes, and then I would have it correct it, but then it would make the same mistake again later when I regenerate. It was like it was losing track a little bit. So once something gets to a certain size, what I found is it's better to have that entire bit of code in the context window, but don't ask it to regenerate the whole thing every time. Ask it to like enhance this function to do this, and then it just gives you just that function. I take that function now and I paste it into my code base myself, right? So I'm starting to work with it that way. And of course, there are tools now. Cursor is becoming very popular these days. Cursor is a fork of VS Code. If you're familiar with software development, right? VS Code was Microsoft's open source, now IDE, Integrated Development Environment. So they took VS Code and injected AI into it. So it's now sort of an AI-based VS Code environment that can use any LLM. It's really interesting, and it seems to be doing well. But there's a whole bunch of startups in this field, a whole bunch of people saying, we've solved it. Our little thing with the LLM does better software development than anything else. We'll see, right? But the concept is there, and this is likely to expand. Did anybody ask Hobson to generate some code? I mean, you can ask him to write a Python program to do something. Feel free. You know, I don't know what kind of length limit I have set on it right now, but it'll go on for a while. All right. So software development. This one kind of a systems engineering example, but that one of the earlier speakers was talking about requirements. So I thought I'll go ahead and cover this one. So some people bemoan the fact that, oh my gosh, human written requirements can have ambiguities in them. Have you ever noticed that? That's because English and any other language can have express ambiguity, right? So imagine this requirement up here at the top. Where is it? Yeah, it is. The main station controls at the A station, which comprises the A2 and also the C2 external stations, shall be converted to the new protocol. How's that for a requirement? Well, it has some ambiguities in it. So I tried asking an LLM with a little bit of coaching, a little bit of prompting and input to not only identify the ambiguities, but also give me several alternatives that remove the ambiguity in different ways. So the idea was this is going to be much easier for a human to fix because they simply read these and say, well, this removes the ambiguity in a certain way, this one in a different way, this one's right. So let's go with this one. And it removes the ambiguity, but the LLM can't decide. How does it know? It's ambiguous, right? It wouldn't know which one you mean. You have to tell it. Give you another fun example here. The system shall deploy the ablative armor when encountering Borg and gravitational anomalies within 6 light years of a starbase or under attack by the Dominion. So I wrote that, and I wrote it intentionally a bit ambiguous, right? So it says, well, wait a minute, do you mean the system shall deploy, encountering either Borg within 6 light years of starbase or when under attack? Do you mean it this way? Or do you mean it gravitational anomalies within 6 light years or under attack? Or do you mean within 6 light years of the starbase? See what I mean? So there's different ambiguities here. So it gave me several choices. So this took minutes to create. It took me a few iterations to get the prompting right, because initially it was identifying ambiguities that I didn't really think were ambiguities. They didn't really materially change the meaning. So I had to coach it, say, no, don't identify things like that. Just identify things where it really would affect the meaning, right? So I thought that was much fun. Is this another one here? No, that's the same one. All right. So here's my get off the stage chart here. So if this is something you want to learn more about, I want to give you a couple of pointers here. This is Obi-Wan, who said you've taken the first step into a larger world. I think the larger world is not just being aware of large language models, but saying, oh, I want to take advantage of this. I want to see what they can do for me. I want to use them. I want to embrace this new technology and see how I can use it, see how it can serve me, quote unquote, right? Or how I can partner with it, whatever metaphor you like, right? I like the more personal one. See, Hobson is my valet, right? I think that's the right. You remember, if you saw the movie, you saw this really interesting relationship between Hobson the valet and Arthur the character, right? And you saw something similar. You remember Batman? Alfred was the butler, and Bruce Wayne, right? And there was a relationship there that goes deeper than just like a servant or something. See, I was kind of trying to bring some of that richness to it. All right. So deeplearning.ai, my very favorite AI education site. So they have two things on there. They have extensive specialization series of courses that are multiple months of courses, the most in-depth stuff I've ever seen. Because you go to a lot of these sites, they have a lot of AI courses, but they're all very high level. They're all overviews. These go really deep. And the really deep specializations are presented through Coursera, which you've probably heard of as an online education site. But deeplearning.ai also has short courses that are free and that are on subjects mostly around generative AI. So prompt engineering and RAG and all these kinds of things. And those are all free. So and they're really good, most of them. So that's a great source, right? One of my favorites. A couple of my work here. This book is coming out, I think, January of next year, they claim, right? Interdependent Human-Machine Teams. And I have a chapter in here that's about using large language models to interact with machines, not just chatbots, right? But actually controlling devices and machines, and how would it work for LLMs to be controlling them. But it also recaps a lot of the things we talked about today about the sentience and that sort of thing. So that's coming from Elsevier. And then this book is now a couple of years old here, more generally about AI. This actually predates large language models, so there's nothing in there about that. But it's about kind of a mix of systems engineering with AI and how those relate and so forth, and has a bit about systems thinking in there and so forth. So that's a book by and published by Wiley.